Hey, how you guys doing today? So today I have the subject before me to help you if you have a letter of demand or postal related debt. But before we get into that, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, NALC Steward Academy, and boop, click the notification bell so that you can be notified whenever I add awesome videos. Today we're going to talk about the strange situation, and I mean strange, when the postal service or your employer who normally pays your wages all of a sudden says, now you owe me money. What can we do in these situations? Well, not too long ago, before the postal service started playing Catch Me If You Can, I don't know if you remember that Leonardo DiCaprio movie where he commits fraud, impersonates, deceives, and lies, and does all these things until finally he gets caught. But until he does, he's not going to stop. Well, so before the Postal Service started playing this game, they used to call you into the office, hand you a letter that said you owed some money, explained it to you, and then had you sign it and had somebody else's signature on it that you could ask about this debt, usually the postmaster. Well, those days are gone. Nowadays, the Postal Service Egan Accounting Service Center mails you this invoice directly to your home, sometimes with little or no explanation. And lately, they've even attached a document that says letter of demand on it, and in very fine print, it says you have the right to file a grievance within 14 days. There's no signature. It's very impersonal. Many letter carriers mistake it for just an invoice. They don't read the appeal rights. They don't file a grievance within 14 days. And so many of them are stuck with that debt. So beware. If you receive either one of these invoices or one of these computer-generated letters of demand, please see your union and file a grievance right away. You only have 14 days to file a grievance. Now, the letter of demand will have a brief explanation of the nature of the debt. It might, for example, say non-OWCP related payroll debt. It might say non-OWCP leave buyback or salary overpayment. Very rarely it will be for some actual equipment that was lost or damaged in the performance of your duties. It has some acronyms on it. CY, for example, means current year. AR means accounts receivable. Tax adjust pay entries. This is very interesting. It means the reason for the debt is that management went into the system and changed your work hours, generating a debt sometimes without your knowledge or consent. And it'll also have a threat on it. For example, it says verbatim, you should pay this debt as described above within 15 days of receiving this notice. If you do not, the debt may be considered delinquent and subject to collection under the Debt Collection Act and its associated regulations. So this is a threat. Why? Because in accordance with Article 28.4, the Postal Service does not have the authority to collect on any debt until the disposition of all grievances is had. It says there, Article 28.4a, if a grievance is initiated and advanced through the grievance arbitration procedure, or a petition has been filed pursuant to the Debt Collection Act, which I will explain later, regardless of the amount and type of debt, collection of the debt will be delayed until disposition of the grievance and or petition has been had, either through settlement or exhaustion of contractual and or administrative remedies. This means that Article 28.4 prohibits the Postal Service from collecting a debt regardless of the amount, regardless of the type, until all grievances concerning the debt have been resolved. In fact, on page 28.1 of the JCAM, Article 28, it states, in advance of any money demand upon an employee for any reason, the employee must be informed in writing, and the demand must include the reasons therefor. An employer claim is a demand made by management that a letter carrier pay for certain types of losses or damage to the mail or to other postal property. This paragraph requires the employer to inform an employee in writing in advance of the reasons for any money demand. In addition to the employee protections in Article 28, ELM Section 437 sets forth procedures under which an employee may request a waiver of an employer claim. So, it has to be in writing. It has to explain why you owe the money. In addition, as we mentioned, ELM 437 sets forth the procedures under which you can request a waiver of a claim when the debt is regarding an overpayment determination. This form, the PS Form 3074, will be your request to have this overpayment rescinded or waived. And we always recommend that you fill this form out. You can even Google it and print it right off the internet and submit it. Now, not only is it for overpayments, but it's also for the post office's failure to withhold health benefit premiums, which sometimes happens. So these are the two categories for when you can fill out this PS Form 3074 waiver of a claim. But of course, brothers and sisters, you are always going to file a grievance, even if you think you owe the money. Why? Because in all circumstances, the following factors will determine whether you will have to pay the money back. And here are some of them. 1, was the loss or debt generated because it was willful or deliberate action on your part which caused it? Were you failing to exercise reasonable care? It must be timely issued. Arbitrators have found that 5 months is way too long for management to try to collect on a debt, and even 1 month of inaction has been found to mitigate the debt by arbitrators. If it's vehicle related, damage, for example, or loss, there's a higher bar that the Postal Service must meet. It must be caused by willful or deliberate misconduct and not merely negligence. The Postal Service cannot collect for damage to private property. So have no fear. You damaged something, maybe you drove away with the gas pump or accidentally hit the side of a house. Hopefully not. But they can't collect because of damage to private property. Only postal property. And we have a national decision in the MRS under M00352. Again, you can Google NALC MRS and find these national binding decisions. That is the decision that one of the decisions that explains that. And even if you were disciplined because of your lack of, for example, reasonable care, negligence, or misconduct of any kind, even if the discipline was upheld, it has no bearing on the validity of the letter of demand. Finally, just like a discipline, the letter of demand must contain appeal rights. If the appeal rights aren't there, we will get it rescinded. Now, what if you are found to have actually owe the money? Well, Article 28.4.b contains some protectionary limits on the Postal Service ability to collect. For example, the amounts of the deductions that they can take from your pay. No more than 15% of an employee's disposable pay or 20% of the employee's biweekly gross pay, whichever is lower, may be deducted each pay period to satisfy a postal debt, unless the parties agree in writing to a different amount. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen, brothers and sisters. So that's another principle to keep in mind. So what is PODBT? PODBT is a debt that resulted from post-tax dollars. What is PODBP? That is a debt that resulted in pre-tax dollars. So for example, health benefit premiums. If you've left your election alone, it will automatically come out as pre-tax dollars. So you would have a debt for those in pre-tax dollars, whereas you would have a debt for post-tax dollars for something such as wages. Now, we mentioned the PS Form 3074. Please always fill this out if it's regarding an overpayment or the Postal Service not withholding health benefit premiums. Now, this is very important that you keep in mind. What happens after you've been gone on LWOP, leave without pay, for an extended period of time, and perhaps you've accrued a debt because your health benefit premiums have not been paid? So the Postal Service has been paying them for you, and now you owe them money. The Postal Service always wants to suck out the entire amount as soon as you get back into pay status. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. So please file within 14 days so that we can stop this non-contractual practice. That money will have to be refunded to you, and they will have to follow the procedures in Article 28 of actually giving you a letter of demand with appeal rights. And what if you didn't have insurance, for example, during the period of time that the premiums weren't paid, which sometimes has happened in past cases I've had? You won't owe the money. There is always arguments to be made as long as you file the grievance. For example, what if the postmaster doesn't fill out his part of the 3074 in a timely manner? Well, they can't collect until the disposition of this form is completed. And guess what happens when management delays taking action? You got it. Arbitrators do not look favorably on unjustified delays by management in the collection process. Now, unfortunately, there are times, brothers and sisters, I know, when you didn't get your mail and you didn't file a timely grievance within 14 days. Is all lost? No. Why? Because as you remember me saying, under the Debt Collection Act, you can still petition for a hearing. You have 15 days from when? From when the Postal Service finds out that you didn't file a grievance and they issue what's called a Notice of Involuntary Administrative Salary Offset under the Debt Collection Act. It will have this exact verbiage on it. And they will issue you this letter saying, okay, you owe us the money. So we've issued this Notice of Involuntary Administrative Salary. From that date, now you have 15 days to file for a hearing under the Debt Collection Act. So no, please know that this form exists, and I will write the address of the forum and put it in the comments section for you. But if you're filing a grievance, what should you request? Well, there are two main items. Of course, each situation is a little bit different, but you are going to need at least two items. You're going to need the clock rings for the period in question. And then you can simply ask for all documentation management relies upon to determine that the grievant has a debt in the amount of such and such dollars, the exact amount that is in the letter of demand. Now, as to the reasons for these specific items, number one is obvious. You always need clock rings. They tell us what the carrier did, what kind of status they were in during the period in question, so on and so forth. And number two, self-explanatory as well. It is the whole entire basis upon which management claims that they are determining that you owe this money. Now, what if you receive an invoice after you retire? Well, contractually, you're not an employee of the Postal Service, so you can't file a normal grievance. Fortunately, in our national agreement, there's a new section under JCAM page 28-4. It says, if a retiree receives an invoice or notice of debt determination from the Postal Service after his or her separation date, the retiree may initiate a grievance through the local branch of his or her former employing office. Such dispute must be initiated directly to Step B. The grievance must be received at Step B within 30 days from the date the retiree first learned or may reasonably have been expected to have learned of the Postal Service intent to collect the debt. So there you have it. I think we've covered all the bases. Now, let's pretend you have a conscientious, responsive, and responsible supervisor, and they give you some or all of the information you've requested. You will request to interview the installation head. Now, each situation is a little different, but there are a set of basic questions you can ask. For example, number 1, and I always start with this one, would you like to rescind this letter of demand? You'll be surprised. If you don't ask, you can't get it. It never hurts to ask. Now, if they do agree to rescind it with you, this is the language you want written on item 19 of the PS Form 8190. The letter of demand dated, whatever date it was issued, in the amount of, the exact amount listed on the letter of demand, is immediately rescinded. Management is precluded from trying to collect on this alleged debt. End quote. What else are you going to ask the postmaster in the processing of your grievance? You're going to ask, please explain how you came to the conclusion that the grievant owes the exact amount of whatever amount it is that they're saying you owe. Number 3, why have you failed to provide the blank? Perhaps they don't have access to certain documentation. For example, OWCP documentation. They have a really hard time getting this stuff, and sometimes they can't provide it. So you can ask why you failed to provide it. And you're implying that if they fail to provide the evidence, then they can't sustain the claim. Number 4, please explain why you waited blank months or weeks to issue this letter of demand. Again, arbitrators do not look kindly upon unjustified delays by management. Number 5, I noticed the debt was generated when management failed to, for example, pay the grievant correctly, or input the wrong type of hours, or unilaterally input some tax pay adjusts. You'll find you can get really far with these I notice questions. You're basically making an argument and forcing management to agree or disagree with your premise, and you're boxing them into as many corners as possible. Very effective in any and all grievance investigations. Number 6, did you provide the grievant with the PS Form 3074? Number 7, please explain how collection of this debt would be in good conscience and in the best interest of the Postal Service. And number 8, why have you failed to provide all the documentation requested? Brothers and sisters, you work hard for the money. You work hard for it, don't you? So don't let management take it, even if you end up owing the money, and that's a big if. You have the right to pay it back on the terms and in the amount amenable to you. So once again, please take advantage of challenging these letters of demand in the grievance procedure and or in the debt collection